Before I moved to Indiana with my girlfriend, I lived with my dad on a ranch in the middle of nowhere in a small town called Hartville in Wyoming. Seriously, the town had maybe 50 people in it total. It was really that small. 25% of the population alone was probably my own family. I have 3 brothers, 1 sister, and well, of course, my dad. My mom passed away from heart disease when I was young, and it really sucks not having her around, as she truly made everything in my life so much better, and all of our lives. I had some aunts and uncles and 1 cousin as well that lived near us. I was going to miss them all, but it was time for me to live my own life. After all, I was 20 years old and I had dreams of the city life, and I always wanted to be a veterinarian. My girlfriend at the time, now wife, and I are very close, and we have been since we met. What started out as a long-distance relationship quickly turned into an 8-year marriage so far, and still going strong. The first few weeks in Indiana was amazing. Apart from missing my family back home, it really felt like everything was coming together, and I was unbelievably happy, to say the least. My wife recently just moved into her own house and I moved in with her. It was nowhere near as desolated, as my old house was in Wyoming. You're only 5 minutes from the nearest city in Indiana, if that. In Wyoming, my family and I were literally at least 30 minutes away from any store at all. Now, with all the good things that were going on in my life, there was a bit of a problem. You see, the house in Indiana had a long history of sketchy and weirdly horrific horrors and rumors about it. Some of them were true, and not just rumors, but some of them were just flat out fake as hell, and I knew they weren't true. However, before Leslie, my wife, moved into the house, it had been broken into at least 3 or 4 times, all in the time span of 20 years. We only knew about this because of our neighbors, and we definitely believed them. We had no reason not to. Plus, besides that, Leslie told me about how she would see this guy in the property before I moved in at least 3 different times that she was sure of. She had no idea who the guy was, though. He only came around during the day. Every time he showed up, apparently, he would stare from the end of the road and then slowly make his way up to the house and up to the window in the kitchen or the dining room and glare inside the house. Every time this happened, Leslie called the police, but they never caught him. He would always be gone by the time the cops made it there. Also, the people who live in rural areas are nice and really sweet old people, or just middle-aged parents with a family. The country is a good place to lay low, and unfortunately, there definitely is a place for everybody. A lot of low lives, aka sex offenders or druggies, will live out there to try and stay low-key and under their radar from the police or just people in general. Of course, I was very concerned about this guy, and Leslie was deeply terrified of him, understandably. I obviously wasn't scared, but definitely worried. You never know what someone is capable of. Anyways, we would be okay because I had a pump-action shotgun along with a .45 handgun and a revolver, and even at that, I had my fair share collection of knives and daggers. I reassured Leslie that everything was going to be okay. Well, one night around 10:30, give or take, we were hanging out in the living room watching a movie, and we were both half asleep. Shockingly, we both wake up to a knock on our front door. It was extremely loud and completely out of the blue, so it jump-scared the living heck out of us. I jumped up and ran to our room, and I grabbed my shotgun out of the closet before anything, and I was about ready to lose my cool. I looked out of the blinds first to make sure it was someone we didn't know. We both got a good look at the man, and Leslie confirmed it was the same stranger who had been showing up to the house unannounced time and time again. He hadn't seen either of us yet at this point. I opened the door and I prepared for the worst, but just like that, he was gone. I stepped outside and I swore I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I told Leslie to go back inside and grab the .45, and to sit in our room on the bed and wait. I looked all around for the man, and I was yelling at him and telling him to show himself. I looked over to my left and I saw that our shed that we don't even use, the side door was wide open. I ran over to the shed and I started hearing noises inside, almost like somebody was moving stuff around. The light was off and I couldn't see a thing. I didn't say anything, because I didn't want him to know I was right there. I was going to wait for him to come out, but something got a hold of me inside and I couldn't hold back. I was so pissed off that he was scaring Leslie and him disturbing our night. I was genuinely infuriated. I wasn't going to let him get away with this, even if my life depended on him. I slowly but surely made my way to the door, and I was almost inside. I took one more step, and now I was directly in the door frame with my other leg behind me, still touching the grass outside. I looked inside and the noise stopped. He must have heard me or noticed me somehow. I went to turn on the light, but the light bulb was out because it wasn't turning on. That's when things went from horrible to much, much worse. Out of nowhere, I heard the man start running towards me and I stepped back and I couldn't believe it, but I accidentally pulled the trigger. I stood still in disbelief as I couldn't believe what I just did. I didn't hit him, but I'm saying it didn't even seem to scare him. He continued running at me, and I hadn't pumped the shotgun yet after shooting it. At this point, I was probably 10 feet away from the shed, and there he was. We were staring right at each other. I pointed the gun at him and I told him to leave, or I was going to kill him. "Do it, you won't kill me, you're a coward." Then he proceeded to call me every name in the book, but then the police sirens came about in the mirror distance. He knew this time was Kane. I looked at him with a deceiving smile, then I dropped my shotgun as he tried to run away. I tackled him to the ground, and I put him in a full Nelson. I held him there until the cops arrived on scene and I let them do their thing. I am glad Leslie called the police. I was hoping that's what she was doing because I didn't tell her to. Everything happened so fast and I was worried she wasn't going to call them. Considering the last 3 times they showed up 30 minutes late each time. Anyways, we're worried that he is going to come back. We have a restraining order on him, but obviously there's really nothing stopping him from coming back if he really wanted to, when he gets out of jail that is, or maybe he already is out of jail, I don't know. All I know is that if he does come back, his ass is mine, and next time I won't be so nice. Family comes first and I won't let anything get in the way of that. Leslie and I are trying to move, but it's a lot easier said than done. She spent just about all of her savings on the down payment of this place, so we're going to have to hang tight for a while.
Both of my parents were in the upper medical industry and worked several hours of the week. This meant that I would be home alone for the majority of the time while they were gone. I love staying alone, as I think of myself as mature and adult-like. At the time, we lived in somewhat of a rural area of Knoxville, Tennessee. Those who have been to or live in Knoxville will probably relate to what I am talking. While it was a nice city, but the crime rate was high, and during the story, I got a taste of what that looks like. One evening, I had to come home from school and my parents were at work. Unfortunately, this was around the time when COVID was still rampant, so my parents had to work extra. 15 years old me immediately hops onto a call of duty to secure my boredom. I placed some matches for a few hours or so before going up to my room and taking a nap. I would say I slept for a good 2 hours or so before I awake to a noise from the kitchen. Looking back, it kind of sounded like a clunking noise you would hear when moving stuff. It was around 7 p.m. I was genuinely annoyed from this noise and put on my slides and went downstairs to see what it was. I ever so slowly turned the corner and what I saw chilled me to the bone. There in the kitchen was a woman going through a fridge. She had her back towards me, so she couldn't see me or know that I was there. To provide a little more detail, she was not at all a pleasant looking woman. She looked homeless, and looking back, I'm pretty sure she was. She wore torn shorts, a tank top, and some sort of wristband. I put my hands over my mouth and slowly went back downstairs. As much as I wanted and needed to call the police, I couldn't. I put my hands over my mouth and slowly went back upstairs. As much I wanted and needed to call the police, I couldn't, as the only home phone we had was near the kitchen. Instead, I thought of another idea. My parents were friends with the neighbors from down the road, so I'd figure I'd go there and call the police. Now, I obviously couldn't have gone through the front door, so I did what anyone else would do. I opened my bedroom window and climbed out while gathering all the courage to fall. When I finally did, I hit the ground with only a sprained ankle and made my way over to the neighbors where I explained what happened. They, of course, instantly let me in to use their phone to call 911. In the meantime, they made a call to the hospital where my parents worked. The police ended up coming a lot faster than I thought and entered my house. Within a minute, they came out with an old, tired, lanky woman in handcuffs. However, she didn't try to get away or resist arrest. As it turns out, my thought was correct after all. She was a dangerous homeless woman who had broken into several homes in the area. My parents had to come home soon after, where they spoke with the police, where they then recommended we get cameras, and that's exactly what we did. The next day, my dad went out and installed a high security system around the house. Surprisingly enough, the story didn't end there. It wasn't until a few nights ago where I had brought up the incidents on my mom and asked if she remembered about it. Her eyes went wide with this look of fear and worry. When I asked what the matter was, she sat me down, held my hands, and said she was gonna tell me something I didn't know. When her and my dad was talking to the cops that day, the cops had mentioned something that would shock them to their core. When they had entered my house, they had found a woman standing outside of my bedroom door. In her hand was one of our kitchen knives that she appeared to have gripping tightly. Let's just say, if I hadn't jumped out of my window, things probably wouldn't have ended well for me. Thankfully, we hadn't had any break-ins as of today, and I hope it stays that way. I was 14 years old, and my mom and I had been living in a 3-bedroom double-wide trailer ever since we left my dad. My mom worked at full-time job, which meant that from Monday to Friday I would have the house for myself for about 2 hours after getting home from school and before she got home from work. I usually would spend my time on my computer, and in no time at all, my mom would be home. At least that was when I felt comfortable in my house. That all changed though. One day, when I found myself walking in on a burglary in progress, I had just gotten home from school, and when I walked into my house, everything seemed normal. I walked inside and locked the door behind me before taking my shoes off. And as I was in the process of taking off my shoes, I could have sworn I heard something come from the room where we used to store our moving boxes in the back of the trailer. At first, I assumed it was just a box or the house settling, and I didn't pay the noise any mind. But before I could even stand up from taking my shoes off, I heard it again. This time, it worried me a bit, so I decided to call out to see if my mom had come home early. But when I yelled out, there was no response. Still, something felt a bit onto me, so I decided to check the room out real quick before getting comfortable. I poked my head through the door and looked around, but from what I could tell, nothing had changed, which reassured me that I had in fact heard the house settling. After that, I went about my normal routine. I stepped into my room and put my backpack on my bed before walking back out onto the kitchen for a quick snack. I reached into the cabinet and pulled out a fruit roll-up. But before I could open it, I heard another sound coming from the back room. Only this time, It was followed by something that shook me to my core. After the sound is something thumping on the ground in the room. I heard that undoubtedly a man let out a single cough. I dropped my snack and instinctively began running through the house and towards my bedroom. I'm not sure why I chose my room instead of the front door. Maybe it was where I felt the safest. But either way, I sprinted into my bedroom, which was 2 doors down from the back room. And without hesitating, I did the only thing I could think of, just like I had seen in movies. I grabbed my wooden desk chair and prompted it against my bedroom door. It was perfect timing too, because as soon as the door was wedged shut, whoever was in my house began banging up against my bedroom door. I fell back in fear and began looking around to think of what I could do next. And that was when I came to my senses. I looked over to my window and saw my escape. I opened it up and pushed the screen out before climbing through it. And since we lived in a trailer, the window were only about 5 feet off the ground. Once I was out of the house, I quickly ran through my yard and over to my neighbor's house. It only took him a few seconds before he answered the door. After I began pounding on it and screaming for help, my neighbor opened the door and I explained to him what was happening. He didn't question it at all, and as soon as I saw the panic in my face, he let me into his house and we both waited there for the police and my mom to arrive home. The police showed up about 30 minutes before my mom did, but it was still too late to catch the intruder. By the time they showed up, he had already left the house, not before destroying it though. All 3 of the rooms appeared to be ransacked and my mother's jewelry collection was missing. For a while, I ended up staying at my neighbor's house or a friend's house after school, while I waited for my mom to get home. I just wasn't comfortable being alone in my house anymore.